Good Saturday to you. I am just your basic roving reporter, the vintage animation nerd, with my absolute favorite episodes of Hanna Barbera's Superfriends, or the Superpowers team, or basically Hanna Barbera refused to use the name Justice League. Superfriends ran from about 73 through, oh good grief, was the Superpowers team 86, 85, 86, 85, 86, what have you. Superfriends was basically the 1970s for Hanna-Barbera, and had enough staying power that it could last until the mid-80s. There were a lot of different seasons, a lot of different iterations of Super Friends. I'm going to try to pick at least one from each. Some seasons and series were far superior to others, so they're going to get the nod twice. Let's start with number 10. Always a good place to start with the top 10 list. Number 10. The androids from the very first season of Super Friends. The hour-long episodes. The junior Super Friends years of Wendy, Marvin, and Wonder Dog. Wendy, of whom ever brought anything resembling intelligence or talent to the table when asked to do so. A lot of people malign the Wonder Twins and Gleek for sort of damaging Super Friends. The junior Super Friends were about 10 times worse than the Wonder Twins ever were, thanks especially to Marvin and Wonder Dog. Anywho, back to the androids. Dr. Rebos and his assistant Loco think that the U.S. is spending too much money on space exploration and not enough on the woes here on Earth. What does Dr. Rebos do? He writes his local congressman or local newspaper about it. No. He builds a batch of android facsimiles to sabotage the space program, including an android Wonder Dog, which nobody asked for, and an android facsimile of Superman. Which in turn ups the ante of the episode. I'm a big Saturday morning animation geek, and my favorite trope was always the robot doppelganger, android clone gimmick. So, the androids can make it on the list from the very first season of Super Friends. The hour-long episodes that were so preachy that they seemed to last 3 times longer than their runtime, and with no Lex Luthor, no Black Manta, no Riddler, no real villain in sight. Always just a misguided scientist and his stupid assistant. But the androids was one of the best. Well, okay. Number 9, from the all-new Super Friends Hour, the Mind Maidens. Medulla and the Mind Maidens. Again, Medulla thinks that there are not enough women in power. So what does she do? Well, she runs for an elected office, she writes her local newspaper, she No. She bends other women's will to her own because when she says not enough women are in power, she thinks that she's the only one who should be. And she literally erases men from the world and puts them on digital tape. There are times when this episode almost rings like one of the hour-long episodes. Except Medulla really is super villainous. She is a legitimate villainess. This is one of those that I used to see on the Superman Batman Adventure Hour all of the time when it was airing on USA Network and eventually Cartoon Network. And I always seemed to enjoy this episode. Hence, it's in the top 10. Where it flails and flounders a little bit is that this was not a good season of Superfriends. This was not the best season. In chronological order, when did the Wonder Twins debut? Was the all-new Superfriends Hour before the Legion of Doom series? Yeah, I think All New Superfriends Hour came out before Challenge, so this is where the Wonder Twins actually debuted, actually replaced the Junior Super Friends. Wait. Number 8, Revenge of Doom, from the Lost episode of the 1980s. The Revenge of Doom brought back the Legion of Doom. It was a welcome return of the Legion of Doom for a 7-minute episode, and which gave about 4 members out of 13 of the Legion speaking roles again, which were basically to reintroduce themselves. But we got to see them all on screen one more time. Luthor, Brainiac, Riddler, Scarecrow, Toyman, Giganta, Sinestro, Black Manta, Grundy, Grodd, Bizarro. Did I say Toyman? Captain Cold. They were all back in at least physical animated form for 6 or 7 minutes, so it's not like they presented that much of a threat. But it was a welcome return for the Legion of Doom in one of the Lost episodes from the early 80s. Speaking of Lost episodes and Lost seasons, number 7, Battle of the Gods, came from this iteration of the Super Friends. These were the episodes that aired as the B-sides alongside Challenge of the Super Friends and then were never seen again. I mean, I never saw these episodes on Cartoon Network. And I wasn't born until 84, where I would have otherwise seen them back in the late 70s. Wait a minute. Yeah, it's called Battle of the Gods. It's episode 14. One of the goddesses believes that Hera has placed too much stock in Wonder Woman and in the Super Friends. I think it's Aphrodite. Can't remember. Anyway, she challenges the Super Friends to several godlike tests, including Batman and Robin having to solve the riddle of not the Sphinx, riddle of, it's a winged lion. Anyway, because Batman and Robin naturally aren't about to overpower a god in a test of strength. And I love Batman. He was always my favorite DC hero. Obviously, one of my favorite members of the Justice League. But he's not about to overpower a god, even in Hanna Barbera. Battle of the Gods was one of the episodes from this season that really stood out the best. Number 6. The Darkseid Deception from the Superpowers team, Galactic Guardians. It's the first and only time that Steve Trevor is actually animated by Hanna Barbera. Obviously, Steve Trevor appeared all the time in the Wonder Woman live-action series. But it's the first and only time he made an appearance on Superfriends. Darkseid replaces the GT7 satellite with GC7 satellite with a fake that's about to mutate the entire world. His greatest deception, however, is to disguise himself as Colonel Trevor and turn the real Colonel Trevor into something that looks like a monkey in a spacesuit. Obviously, a huge part of Darkseid's character in the Super Friends series and around the 1980s when he debuted was that he was always smitten with Wonder Woman. So that could be a huge problem when he captures her actual romantic interest and disguises himself as him. It was a welcome debut for Colonel Trevor, and again, his only appearance on the series. And Superpowers Team Galactic Guardians was one of the finer series and a great send-off to the franchise. Number 5, Terror at 20,000 Fathoms from the World's Greatest Superfriends series. Again, huge Batman fan. And along come Captain Nimoy to replace Batman with an android duplicate. Because he's trying to sabotage the high seas with torpedoes. A lot of times, World's Greatest Super Friends strayed from the comics and mixed animation with literature. Lords of Middle-earth was Lord of the Rings. Journey to Oz was obviously The Wizard of Oz. Terror at 20,000 Fathoms was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and Captain Nimoy was supposed to be Nemo. Super Friends Meet Frankenstein was, well, you get it. And it was and these episodes were peppered in there with far better episodes that weren't trying to rip off classic literature. But I did enjoy Terror at 20,000 Fathoms. Superman gives lip service to Brainiac's name, and we get to see the Kandorians and the model city of Kandor. Nice B-side story there. We'll get to see the Wonder Twins in action as they're the ones who actually destroy the android Batman. Whilst the real Batman with Robin and Aquaman are captured by Nimoy and trapped in torpedoes. Number 4. I have not talked about Challenge of the Super Friends yet. I know I haven't. It's only fitting that I save them for the top 5. The first iconic iteration of Challenge of the Super Friends ranks in at number 4 with the Trial of the Super Friends. The Saturday morning cartoon trope about the Saturday morning cartoon trope of androids, and Batman is a key player again. Legion of Doom is after something called the liquid light, which is basically molten lava. Molten lava in a contained state up until it's released. But Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, and the Green Lantern happen to be guarding it. Thanks to Cheetah, Scarecrow, and Sinestro, the Super Friends guarding it are deprived of their power weapons, and the Legion of Doom eventually captures them, forcing them into a mock trial where they are, of course, found guilty because Lex Luthor is their judge and the Legion of Doom are their jury. Their sentence: Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, and Green Lantern have to fight Brainiac's android doubles of them who happen to be wearing their power devices. Well, in short order, the real Super Friends win, and we return to the B story about the liquid light and the fact that Superman and the Flash are now trying to guard it because the original 4 guards of the facility are gone temporarily. Of course, this is an episode of Challenge of the Super Friends. It winds up with a grudge battle between 13 members of the Legion of Doom and 11 Super Friends, and Super Friends win. Number 3, Universe of Evil, the world's greatest Super Friends. The Universe of Evil is a classic. It is seriously the best of world's greatest Super Friends. The Super Friends, are transported to another world where this Justice League is evil. And the Hall of Evil literally has Satan's head on top of it, as Hanna Barbera would animate Satan's head. Yes, there's an evil version of Batman, Robin, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, and the Man of Steel himself. Where this episode takes a hit is there is an evil version of Gleek. But the only time we see the evil Wonder Twins is in silhouette. Universe of Evil transports Superman to our Earth and our Superman to his, putting our Earth in danger and Superman in danger from the evil from the super criminals once they learn that he's not their Superman. Well, it's Hanna Barbera, it's Super Friends, it's the late 70s. There's going to be a happy ending. And it's a grudge showdown trying to keep Vesuvius, involving Vesuvius and whether or not it's going to erupt. As this titanic power struggle takes place simultaneously across both dimensions. Number 2, Super Friends, rest in peace. Challenge of the Super Friends. A Dr. Nataz, one-time member of the Legion of Doom, has found something called Noxium, which is a crystal that combines all of the Super Friends' weaknesses. Yellow beam for Green Lantern, kryptonite for Superman. What is it? An ice cube for Flash? A bullet for Batman? God love him, but shoot, I can't remember Wonder Woman's weakness either. I don't think either Superman or Wonder Woman were big fans of magic. Anyway, well, the Legion of Doom has the Noxium crystal, and they lure the Super Friends out one by one to blast them with a ray that consequently emulates each of their weaknesses when it hits them in one beam. Well, but are the Super Friends really gone? Is the Legion of Doom really the last team standing? It's late 70s Hanna Barbera. What do you think? Alright. The honorable mentions. Honorable mentions. I didn't talk about the Legendary Superpowers show in my top 10 list. I didn't address the season that introduced El Dorado. Alright. Well, introduced him. Did they introduce Firestorm? Anyway. 84. Super Friends, a Legendary Superpowers show. The Deadly Dolls, Dreadful Dolls, what have you. One of them was a Johnny Quest episode. Anyway, doll maker, who was obviously supposed to be Toyman with the same voice actor, creates magic mud dolls of the Super Friends, and these magic mud dolls coincidentally hypnotize whoever their likeness is. It's doing his deeds. Royal Ruse was another good episode, and it's a Darkseid centric episode again. Space Knights of Camelon. The world's greatest Super Friends. Space Knights of Camelon. The very first episode of Super Friends I ever saw when Cartoon Network moved into my local market in about 1999. So I would have already been 15 or so when I saw these. That being said, for the first time in my life, I saw Superman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Batman, and Robin all on one screen. And I could forgive the Wonder Twins. Honorable mention, Professor Goodfellow's Geek. Plastic Man as a guest superhero who would never show up in another iteration of Super Friends again. The very next time we'd see Plastic Man on screen, Ruby Spears would animate him. And Plastic Man's cameo was all of 2 minutes long. But he saved the day in such a way that the Super Friends couldn't do without him in 43 minutes. Bully for You. A young kid gets his hands on Batman's utility belt and decides to use it against his bully. Of course, this is a kid who's tired of being pushed around, so he automatically thinks that the bat gadgets make him tough. Prejudice. The only Wonder Twins short that should be even an honorable mention on the top 10 list. And if this had been 11, I would have made this number 11. Hanna Barbera addressed the evils of prejudice, the horrors of racism in 5 or 6 minutes and with superheroes. But they addressed also unity between the races, and that was important. Escape from Star City from Galactic Guardians Superpowers team. It's a question of which was the actual final episode of Superfriends. It comes down to Star City or one other. According to Cartoon Network, Star City was about the time that they started recycling the Superfriends again. According to the DVDs, and more appropriately, I think that it's a different episode. Escape from Star City has Batman, Samurai, and the Green Lantern, and Firestorm, aboard a place called Star City, built by Dr. Oh God. Our Dr. Romo? No. Dr. Moto, and where he and his daughter Kitty now live. Darkseid wants access to Star City. Darkseid gains control of Star City and its robot denizens, who have now trapped the Superpowers team up there, while Superman and Aquaman deal with something else on Earth. The absolute best episode of Superfriends. Number 1. The best in all of the franchise. Superpowers team. Galactic Guardians. The death of Superman. We open midway through the episode where Superman is already gone. Firestorm and he had gone to another planet, wherein Firestorm unwittingly unearths kryptonite and brings Superman too close to it. A world mourns. Firestorm is obviously shaken. As the last person, is not only the last person to see Superman alive, but the one who blames himself for his untimely demise. Darkseid is never one to waste any time, so he and his forces appear inside the Hall of Justice to capture the other Super Friends, while Batman, Green Lantern, Firestorm, Cyborg, and I think Wonder Woman all go to the Fortress of Solitude to put Superman's affairs in order. But is Superman really gone? We get to see the Fortress of Solitude. We get to see Darkseid almost triumphant. We get to see the loss of Superman, allegedly. It was a great what should have been ending to the Super Friends franchise. And again, there are questions. I think Cartoon Network got it wrong when they aired The Death of Superman and then Escape from Star City just before starting all over again. But there you have it. My top 10 favorite episodes of the Super Friends Superpowers Team franchise. The great Justice League cartoons of the 2000s need not apply. The great Justice League cartoons of the 2000s trump this entire list. I'm talking about the Super Friends from the early 70s to the mid 80s. I'm Kent Brindley, Vintage Animation Nerd. I'll see you soon. Thanks for listening.